Before you can create your graph, you will need to prepare your data and put it in an Excel sheet like this one. The data will have to be presented in a certain way so that it will be easier for you to create the graphs. In this example, I have a series of measurements showing the percentage of 5 different types of cells in 2 different species, species 1 and species 2. And I have 2 sets of data. The first one being the class data. It is a measurement of made by several students. The average is calculated as well as the standard error. I also have my personal data, that was measured by myself, and there is no standard error on this part. So it's very similar to the data you will use for your mitosis lab, although not exactly the same. To create the graph, select the 5 types of cells as well as the percentage. Then click on Insert and then choose the right type of graph, a clustered column here. And then the graph appears. And you can see that the blue columns show the percentages for each of the 5 types. Next, I need to add the percentages for the second species on this graph. To do so, click on this chart area, right-click, and go to Select Data. So this shows the data that's already on the graph. The series 1 is this one. I'm going to rename it because it will be easier for later. So species 1, and then I click. And to add a second data, which will be used for species 2, I just click on the plus button. I'm going to call it species 2, and then here remove the text and select the percentages for the second species and click on OK. The orange bars show the percentages for the second species. The next step will be to add error bars on both series. So to do so, click on one of the 2. So I'm going to start with the blue series. So clicking once on one of the bars will select the whole series. Then if I go to Chart Design and then go to Add Chart Element, Error bars, standard error. So the error bars were added, but they're not properly formatted. So I'm going to click on one of the error bars, right-click, and go to Format Error Bars. It will open the Format panel on the right, and I can change the way the error bars look. First, I just want to see the plus error bar. Because this is a bar graph, I don't want to see the minus one. And style with a cap is okay. And then you can see that the value here for all the error bars are the same. So I have to change that and specify my own values for each of the categories. So I click on Custom and Specify Value. And what I have to do is just select on my Excel sheet the values for the 5 types of cells. That's it. You can see that the error bars were added, and then for each type of cell, they have a different value. I'm going to do the same for the orange series. So click on one of the orange bars, Chart Design, Add, Error Bar, Standard Error. Click on the error bar, Format, Plus, Custom, Specify Value, selecting the value, OK. That's it. The error bars are now correctly added. So all the data is now on this graph that I will use for the top panel, but I need to change the way it looks because the format is very important. If you read, and you should, the appendix on Brightspace that says how to graph scientific data, you will see that in order to present your data in a scientific journal, you have to follow a set of rules. Those rules are different than if you were publishing a graph in a magazine or a newspaper. For scientific papers, scientific journals, you need to have a format which is going to really emphasize the data over any other format elements. So for example here, the chart title is not necessary, because it will be added in the caption below the graph. So I'm clicking on the chart title itself and I go to delete. Same thing for those horizontal lines. They don't need to be here, so just delete them. You can click on delete on your keyboard or right click and select delete. I also need to remove this frame all around the graph. So I click on the chart area, and here in the format panel, click on no line. And the border is gone. Next, I will need to format both axes on this graph. The y-axis is a quantitative one, whereas the x-axis is qualitative. It doesn't have any values but categories. So they will need to be formatted differently. To format an axis, just click on it, go to right click and go to Format Axis. On this quantitative axis, I have different options. The first one is called Bounds. The Bounds option shows you the maximum and the minimum value that Excel put by default on your graph. So you see in this case, my y-axis goes between 0 and 70. But this area here at the top between 60 and 70 doesn't contain any data. It's just white space. It's not needed. So I'm going to stop my axis at 60. It's going to be more efficient to present my data. So I type 60 here in the maximum. Okay, and you see, that's it. It just changed the scale and the range of my graph. Next, I need to change the number of these units here. These numbers which are present on the y-axis. The rules say that I should have between 3 to 5 of these numbers, and each of them will need to have also a tick mark, which I will add later. So to add between 3 to 5, I'm going to add 5. So I'm going to have here a major unit of 15, and then now have 0, 15, 30, 45, 60. Okay, so I have 5 values, which is good. And I'm going to add the tick marks. The tick marks are the small lines, horizontal lines, that will be on the axis beside each of these values. You have two types of tick marks, the major type and the minor type. Depending on the graph and where you want them to be placed, you have to select the major of the minor type. If you don't know which one, just try it, both. I know for this type of quantitative axis, I need the major type, and I want them to be located outside of the axis. Not on this graph area, but outside. So I selected outside for major type, and I have my 5 tick marks. Next, I will format the x-axis. So I click on it, right click, Format Axis. So I have different options here because it's not a quantitative axis. I don't have any values to change, but I still need to add the tick marks. The tick marks on this type of axis is minor type. I want it outside. And you can see they're well added here. They're very faint because they're gray. I will change the color a bit later. I can show you what the major type were. There are tick marks located in between the data series, which is not what I want. So that's why I selected the minor type. So they're a bit faint, so I'm going to change the color by clicking on the bucket tool and just changing the color to black. And you can see now that the tick marks are properly located. So both my axes are formatted now. Finally, I need to add a symbol key or a legend on my graph to indicate to the reader what the different colors represent. So I'm going to select the plot area, go to Chart Design, Add Element, go to Legend, and choose one of the options. Here, I'm going to choose Right. So you saw it moved the graph to the left. Actually, I can change this by clicking on the legend, right-click, Format, and then untick this option that says shows the legend without overlapping the chart. And in this case, I'm just putting the legend in an empty part of the graph. So it shows what are the two different colors. If you want to change the text here, you have to actually change it in the select data, because it's the name is specified here, species 1, species 2. Okay? But you can change the text by selecting it and if you want to make it bigger or bold, italic, that will be needed, for example, to indicate the genus and species, which should be written in italics. You can modify it with modify the text like you would for any other text. Just gonna put that. So I'm done with the top panel. Now I will have to repeat the same procedure with the second set of data, which is the personal data, to generate the lower panel. So I'm going to insert the second panel using the same method as for the first one. So select the data, go to Insert, choose the type of graph, column, select the second set of data, select plus, so series 2, select the percentages, and this adds the orange bars. I'm going to clean up a bit by removing the lines, the title, and I'm going to format the axis. The y-axis is in between 0 and 60, same as the other one. The units, I'm going to do the same here. It's going to be more coherent. And I'm not done. And I also have to add the tick marks. So major type here outside, and make sure, yeah, the color is black, so it's good. Same thing with the x-axis. So I just here have to add tick marks. So they're the minor type on this type of axis. Outside, click on the bucket to change the color, and my axes are good. I'm going to remove the border around the graph. It's gone. And finally, I will need to add a label under the x-axis. So only one label will be shown on the graph. It will be under the lower panel. So that's why I'm adding it under this panel. So I go to Chart Design, Add Chart Element, Axis Title, and I want to add title on the primary horizontal axis. So it's this one here. And it's type of cells. Okay. When I added the title, it just moved a bit. The graph, I'm going to stretch it a bit to make sure I have the same scale here between the lower and the top panel. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but that should be pretty close. Okay, and now this is the top panel. I will add the label for the y-axis when I stitch the two graphs together, and I will do that in a Word file. Now both panels are ready. I just have to put them together to make them look like they're part of one big two-panel graph. So what I'm going to do is to copy those individual panels and paste them into a Word document where I will put them together. I think it's easier than doing that in Excel. So I copy this chart, this graph, and paste it in a Word document. Same thing for the lower panel. Copy and paste. And then you see that both panels are now on Word. What I will have to do, I'm just going to zoom in, is to move up the bottom panel a bit, and then so it will cover the labels on this axis, because I should only have labels on the bottom panel. So to be able to move the panel using the arrow keys on your keyboard, which is very convenient, click on the frame here of the bottom panel and go to Layout, Wrap Text, and choose In Front of Text. This way you can move precisely the graph near the top panel. That's it. The last thing I have to do, I'm going to zoom in a bit more, is to join these two axes. So I'm going to Insert, Shape, Align, and then I'm just going to draw a line, and then I'm going to right-click, Format Shape, and increase the size of the line to 0.75, which is the good size, and also make it black. Okay, So it is well aligned. If you see a small shift here, it's not a big deal, because when you will look at the graph at 100%, it will look perfectly aligned. Okay, so it's good. And finally, I have to add the label for the y-axis. So it's going to be a text box. So add a text box. I'm going to draw it here. I'm going to write percentage of sales. I'm going to put percent in brackets. Percentage is not a unit, but it's always nice to have the symbol. And then if I go on shape format and click on no outline, it will remove the frame around my label. I can also decrease a bit the text to maybe 10, so it's the same as the other one. And here I'm going to click to rotate this box, and I'm going to put it here, about in the middle. Okay, so it looks good. And the last thing I have to do is to add the caption. So it's another text box. So I'm not going to go in detail in the content of the caption. I refer to the document Graphing Data on Brightspace, and one paragraph says what should be included in my caption. So read that and make sure you put everything that applies to this particular type of graph. Okay, so don't forget the caption, it's important. The caption should not have an outline either, so no outline. And that's it, you're done. So you have this graph, a two-panel graph, and it shows both the class and average with the standard error on the top panel and your own data on the lower panel.